Kia ora. I want to welcome Laurie Winkless, who is here to chat with us about something very close to my heart, how to make our cities more pedestrian friendly for those who struggle to get around as fast as us young able-bodied people. Laurie, you have written a really awesome article, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about it.
Kia ora, Casey. Absolutely, my pleasure. So I write one article a month for Forbes, and on there I tend to focus on the science of cities, which is a pretty broad remit, actually. And yeah, this is also a topic very close to my heart too. As a long-term pedestrian, I also drive, but I prefer to walk. I do think a lot about how we navigate the urban environment. And in this latest article, I've focused on a paper from the University of Bath in the UK. And they're a group of behavioral scientists, actually, have looked at the gait speed, so the average walking speed of a group of older people. And they found that the vast majority of those people cannot walk at the speed that is kind of assumed when it comes to pedestrian crossing timings. So it was a really interesting paper, and I had the opportunity to actually interview Max, who wrote it, and talk to him a bit more about it. So yeah, it was a really interesting and fun, and I think hopefully useful article to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I find really fascinating is the implications of this when it
Mm.
comes to how we design cities. Because, like you said, we haven't, as a community, kind of designed even simple things like the time that it takes to cross the street with people who are older or differently abled in
Mm.
mind. And so, what are the kind of implications that come with this that you can sort of see from this paper?
Well, Max's view on it was very much from a kind of physical health perspective. So he doesn't actually do research into cities at all. He's very much focused on how people keep their mobility throughout their lives. So, we know logically that walkable cities with nice walkable infrastructure, tends to be home to people who then walk more. So when we look at our older populations, if they then feel that they can't safely cross the roads in their neighborhood, well, then they're far more likely to stay home and maybe, miss out on physical exercise and miss out on social opportunities, which is super, super important as we age. So that idea that something as seemingly simple as, declaring a time, a speed to walk across a crossing, that can have implications on people's physical health and mental health long into their, older years, which I find really devastating and heartbreaking, honestly.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The thing, I really tried this actually after reading
Mm.
your article,
Yeah.
walking across the road as kind of slowly as I could. It's kind of hard to judge exactly how fast you're going when
Mm.
you're just there, but I tried to walk relatively slowly, and that feeling of being quite uncomfortable, and feeling like other people are looking at you, feeling like you're not, you're kind of racing a clock.
Mm.
That can be really isolating, I'm sure. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating to have that real world experience after having a read of this coverage of yours from that study.
Yeah, thank you. I think something that really stuck with me was I actually spoke to another researcher called Professor Nick Tyler, who's also from the UK, and he really reminded me that even as a pedestrian, you're still a road user. So the idea that
Mm.
you kind of have to rush across the road as a pedestrian because you don't want to slow down cars, like that's not the right way around. Like we are also road users as pedestrians. So yeah, I find that, really it definitely has made me think a bit differently to how I move around my local neighborhood. Um, and the thing for me really with this was the speeds. Actually, the assumed speed is actually much higher than you might think. So basically, not everywhere, but most international road codes assume a walking speed of 1.2 meters per second. Now, that is about 4 kilometers an hour, which actually isn't that slow when you think about it. And in this study that Max did, I think it's 1,110 people in the study, like 17 of them, 1.5% of people in this study could walk at that speed. So they're not anywhere close to being able to walk at that speed. So that's a tiny, tiny proportion of this group. And just as a reminder, this group is people aged over 65 and who live with some limited mobility. But importantly, these people are people who live in their towns, in their communities. So they're not in sheltered accommodation. They are expected to be able to navigate the streets around them. And they are not meeting these standards that were set, we think, in the 1950s, based on much different demographics than we have now, of course.
That's such a great point. Yeah, the 1950s, the number of people who were over the age of 65 as a proportion of the population was so much lower than it is now, considering we have an aging population. Do you think there's a good kind of argument that you could make around this study that in order to prepare our cities for an older population as we get older over time, that this is a really important finding to adjust our expectations and the way that our streets work?
I think it definitely is, because I think we still, and I'm saying we collectively, have this idea of cities as places that young people live in. But of course, that's not true. Cities are home to everyone. And, you mentioned the different demographic shift. I think I looked back at some publicly available data from the UK, and from the kind of mid 1950s to today, the relative proportion of the population aged over 70 has doubled in that time. So this is not a small increase. We're not slowly getting older. We're not just gradually living a little bit longer. Our populations are older and are living longer. So the fact that our homes and our towns and our cities that we live in really aren't safe to be navigated by people in those older age groups, it's a real injustice, actually, for me. And I do think that there's an opportunity here to say, look, we know that cities were designed in this way, but what the needs of a city are, those needs of a city have changed in that time, and we really need to rethink that. What that looks like, of course, is up for debate, but I do think it's a good opportunity to look into this again.
Yeah. Speaking of that, actually, what sort of further research or studies would you like to see come out of this so that we can get a better understanding of how to reshape our cities, particularly for older populations, for disabled populations, for people who are moving with a pram or a little one, that sort of thing? All of these kinds of road users, like you said.
Yeah, I would love to see a lot more joined up thinking around this, because I do think there's a tendency to kind of see urban design as one thing, and to see, physical exercise scientists as a totally separate thing. But research like this shows that they interact. So one thing I would really love to see is a genuine look at a set of crossings in a real city, to understand what it would look like, what the potential impact on traffic would be, for example, if we were to increase the crossing time. So if we were to give people that little bit longer to cross the road safely, what impact would that really have on traffic? Because I would argue that it would need to have a very significant impact on traffic before I would say, oh, it's not worth it. Because, like I said, these people are road users. We are city dwellers like everyone else, and they have just as much right to use the road infrastructure as people on four wheels. So I would love to see more of that, and I would love to see more really genuinely kind of cross-collaborative research, where we are looking at the human factors and we are looking at the urban design factors, to really get some numbers into this. Because I just don't think it's good enough to know that it's a problem. I think we really need to start building the evidence base so that we can attack that problem and change it.
I feel like that would be a great experiment for Wellington to run. What do you think?
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, absolutely. I'm up for it.
That'd be so good. Yeah, I think that would be great. And I think something that I really love about your coverage, and just broadly the way that you think as well, is how you do see all of these interconnected parts of a city. Cities are so interesting because they are so messy and they connect loads of different things. It's really hard to break it into one, distinct thing to consider, or one distinct thing to design around. You've got loads of different road users. You've got loads of different needs for the different city dwellers getting from A to B, and making sure that the city is catering to as much of that messiness as possible. It is so important,
Yeah.
especially in the 21st century, when cities are where most people are living.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we do ourselves a disservice to think of cities as infrastructure, because actually cities are organisms. And because of that, we can't just treat one bit of it and assume the rest of it will just magically work. Like, we have to think about it as a complex system. And we haven't historically done that. We really haven't done that. So I'm very much of the mind of, we need to think about cities as a living, breathing, ever-changing, dynamic system, rather than seeing it as a set of blocks that we can move around at our will. I think it does us all a great disservice to think of it that way.
Totoko. I feel like this is probably a big question for you, and
Mm.
definitely outside of the specific study that you were talking about from Bath. But I'm curious what other signs of that kind of ripple effect you've been seeing in research, whether it's the exercise habits
Mm.
of older people or whether it's social isolation. Has there been anything that's come to your mind, like from a research perspective, that
Mm.
you can see these effects of that kind of general 1950s thinking about young people
Yeah.
sort of like being able to cross the road really fast? Like that's kind of indicative of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. So Max Western at Bath is not the only person who's looking into this. Like this idea of how different age groups navigate the city, there's tons of it. And some cities are doing better than others, I will say. There are some parts of the world who are taking this seriously, like Singapore, for example. They have started
Ah.
to really adapt their infrastructure as best they can to older populations. So like a really simple thing. Once you reach a certain age, you get a card that you can swipe at a crossing, and that automatically changes the timing to suit you. And that's true for people.
Fascinating.
Yeah, true for people also living with, different physical mobility issues. You can also apply for the same thing. So I love to see that sort of stuff. But I do think that we are seeing in general to see a shift of thinking of the city more broadly. And like a previous study that I had written about was actually around emissions. So like construction emissions, specifically the carbon emissions from construction. So from the act of building cities. We know that loads of cities are already climate leaders. We know that there are lots of city leaders who are already thinking about emissions and who are already trying to get people out of cars and into lower impact into lower impact transport options. We know that. But actually, for a long time, the question around emissions, particularly around construction, have kind of been ignored because they've been put in the too hard basket. So I've been really kind of reassured in many ways to see lots of researchers putting in proper scientific research, building really detailed databases to try and understand what the emissions footprint of a city dweller even, looks like on a global scale. So I do love to see these kind of more joined up thinking studies in general. And yeah, it's a pleasure for me because I get to dig into the literature as part of my job, and long may that continue. But what I want to see most of all is change actually happening. I want people to be adopting this knowledge and turning it into policy, turning it into good decisions, turning it into funding. That's what I would like to see most of all.
Agreed. I mean, there is so much fascinating knowledge that we have from the likes of the researchers that you've interviewed, and that is just step one. Step two is, putting it into practice. And particularly, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that, the central cities of the world are some of the lowest per person emitters in the world. The amount of pollution that you can reduce by being able to walk places and have all of your amenities very close by is a huge win for the climate. And so if you can make it that more people can feel comfortable and connected socially and feel free to explore those areas in very, high traffic areas, that can make a huge difference for people being able to, make life choices that are great for the planet and for their own social and physical well-being.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the thing I want to see more of is giving people that option, right? Like sometimes we will love living in Wellington. I know you're in the city. I live in Petone, which is another really walkable neighborhood. And that's why I live here. I have the privilege and the option to live in a walkable neighborhood. But that is because I have, certain amounts of money in my bank account and I have physical
Yeah.
health and I have lots of other advantages. I would love for more people to actually have that option, to have the option of being able to walk more places or to cycle more places. And if we keep doing these kind of sprawling cities and these new subsections that are just single family residential homes with nothing else around them, they force you to get into your car to do anything other than just live and sleep. You have to drive to the shops, you have to drive to a school, you have to drive to the doctor. People get locked into that. And I don't think that that's fair. And it's certainly not fair on an individual level. And it's absolutely backwards on an environmental level, on a social level, on an economic level. So we do need to be having more conversations around building walkable neighborhoods, because everybody benefits from them. Even those who want to drive benefit from having walkable infrastructure.
Yes, I mean we could have 10 million conversations about the geometry and kind of like spatial mathematics of car-based cities versus walkable cities, right? Like if you get
Absolutely.
95% of people sort of using the bus or walking or biking or doing any of that combination, then the 5% that want to drive, that's great because you have got loads of space. That's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
I often say to drivers who get grumpy with me when I'm writing always about, the environment and writing about climate impact of everything we do, I will always say to them, like, if you really love driving and if you really hate traffic jams, you should be the biggest proponent of an increased investment in public transport, because
Oh
then we
yeah.
all win. But, they don't
Yes.
ever usually like to hear that.
Yep, it's that whole thing. I can remember talking about, oh, what was it? It must have been congestion charging of some sort. And I said, the
Mm,
anybody who is like wanting to take the train, they are stuck in front of you in traffic. That's that's it. The trains aren't running. It's wild.
yeah,
That's a bit of a
it is wild.
that's a bit of a
It
tangent,
is
but it
wild.
is. It's all connected.
It is.
Again, it's one of those things like where we build our housing, what kind of housing we build, what kind
Mm,
of streets we build, all the way down to those things, those little things that you might not even consider about
yeah.
lengthening the time to be able to cross the road. They're all so interconnected and all of them are so important and kind of build on each other in our response to climate change, in our response to cutting pollution. So
Mm,
yeah, it's really great that you are covering this stuff, including as well, like the kind of building into hilly areas, those kind of
mm,
natural areas that cities haven't really built into yet, or out into greenfield developments where there isn't any housing or infrastructure yet. Thank you
yeah.
so much for all of the
No.
awesome writing that you do. It's
Oh,
great.
my pleasure. And I'm a huge fan of yours, Casey. I subscribe to your newsletter too. So anyone who's watching the video, please do the same, because their work is fantastic and I always really appreciate it too. So it's lovely to kind of formally connect in this way.
It's so lovely. Yeah, and Laurie, you are fantastic to follow on all social platforms and through your work. Like, it is so great to see you in Forbes. It is wonderful. So yeah, make sure that you're checking out Laurie's fantastic work and books and everything, Laurie. It is so nice. You are so fantastic and so clever, and I really appreciate you. It's
Oh,
great.
right back at you, Casey. Thank you so much.